discipleship. Remember yesterday I said there's 3 basic stages of discipleship, or 3 stages of life. The first one he calls essential discipleship, and it's the struggle to get our lives together, And what I'd like to do today is to think about those earlier years of our lives. Our life as a younger person, maybe between teenagers, puberty, and mid-20s, 30s, wherever. There's no particular age for this. And people move through those stages in different times and in different ways. And I'd like to use the section from the beginning of the book on page 16. Find it here. And read part of that to you. So rather than paraphrasing, I thought I'd just read it for you. This is to talk about the first stage, essential discipleship, finding our own kind of identity. Simply put, puberty is designed by God and nature to drive us out of our homes. And puberty generally does its job, sometimes too well. It lies, it hits us with a tumult and violence that overthrows our childhood and sends us out, restless, sexually driven, full of grandiose dreams, but confused and insecure, in search of a new home, one that we can build for ourselves. And this is a time of much longing and searching for an identity, searching for acceptance, searching for a circle of friends, searching for intimacy, searching for someone to marry, searching for a vocation, searching for a career, searching for the right place to live, searching for financial security, and searching for something to give us substance and meaning. In a word, searching for a home. Expressions of this longing and search are what make up the meat of culture, popular music, literature, and movies. Invariably, the motifs and refrains that abound there will revolve around questions like, who am I? Where do I find meaning? Who will love me? How do I find love in a world full of infidelity and false promises? Countless expressions of longing, of heartache, of searching. But in the end, one focus, a burning desire for a home we once had, somehow lost and are looking for again. The struggle from being restlessly driven out of our first home to finding a state and place to call home again is a journey of essential discipleship. So it's a time for us, in many ways, of both leaving the security of our own childhood home, which, as I mentioned, can be something very loving and caring. Sometimes it's not so caring. And searching for something else. It can be a struggle, as he says. It's meant to be a time to somehow express our own identity. I come from a very loving and caring childhood. I'm the second of 10 brothers and sisters, grew up on a farm in southern Indiana, and I have wonderful memories of my parents. As I was just thinking of them this morning, it brought tears to my eyes, just thinking of how much we love them, or still do in many ways. And I'm making a special trip home at the end of July just to visit my brothers and sisters, because I haven't seen them for 6 months. So there's something that's strong and good about that. But at the same point, there's a part of us that wants to leave. For some people, they leave because they don't like it at home, because it's a very difficult place to live. And I have talked with people, and maybe you've had experiences or know people, for whom home is not a pleasant place, where there's a lot of abuse, a lot of anger, a lot of hurt or neglect. I don't know if you've ever heard of something called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences. I just heard about that about a year or two ago. And it's a series of things in a child's life that deeply affect them. Anything from alcohol or drug abuse, separation or divorce of the parents, absence of physical care, the presence of emotional abuse, prisons, deep financial poverty, those things which disrupt the child's life. And for them, maybe this thrust to go out is the desire to escape that. It's not so much, I got to make my own identity, it's I got to get out of here to survive. And that's a tough thing. But as puberty comes on, changes happen. And that tends to cause separation. Like, I need to make my own decisions. I've talked with lots and lots of kids. One of the things about being a priest is people come to us to confession and they say things, and I talk with people in just conversations. And it's amazing how similar, when I start hearing high school confessions, they can be. It's amazing. Because they all deal with some of the same questions, some of the same struggles. And it's calling us as adolescents to seek that. In many cultures in the past, there was a rite of passage that seemed to help that. Are you familiar, any of you, either online or here, familiar with any rites of passage that you've heard about in other cultures or other times? What might they be? Any examples that you can think of? What's that? Quinceañera, okay. Actually, that's a pretty good example. I hadn't thought about that. The history of a quinceañera was a time to prepare the young lady for being a young woman, and the changing of the clothes and the shoes and the whole ritual goes with that. Yeah, that's a good example. I hadn't thought about that. I didn't grow up with that, so that's why I didn't think of it. But yeah, I never had a quinceañera. I feel deprived. Yes. Indian tribes. A lot of Native American tribes. I don't know, do they still do that? Does anybody have any idea?
Yes, they do.
Okay, they do. Okay, thank you, John. Yeah, I didn't know if they did or not. Are you familiar, Bruce, with some of them?
Well, yes and no. I know they do them.
Okay. Yeah, you know that they do them, but that's a kind of a private event. Okay, so within Native American, there's, I think, 18 tribes in New Mexico. Bar mitzvah, yeah. Now, I've never been to a bar mitzvah, so I don't know what that's like, but it's this.
I think our own confirmation is meant to be a rite of passage spiritually in a very big way.
Yes.
Into spiritual adulthood.
Yeah. You're right. Thank you. Just a second, Lynn. Let me finish over. She's talking about you. I'm sorry, I just realized you can't hear what the people are saying here in the room. Probably not loud. One person was talking about Native Americans. She was talking about a bar mitzvah, which is a Jewish tradition. Lynn, for those, it was Lynn who mentioned confirmation. In the Catholic tradition, can somewhat be that. You know, if it's prepared well, can help us. Did you want to say anything more about it, Lynn? Was that Lynn that said that?
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Father Tom, going to college is a fairly modern rite of passage for a lot of people in the United States.
You're right. Yeah, graduation from high school or going to college or graduation from college.
Getting a driver's license.
Oh, very good. That's a very good one. I hadn't thought about that. Getting a driver's license. Can you all hear them, by the way? Okay, yes. Okay. Sweet 16 party. So it's kind of a parallel to the quinceañera, but not exactly, not as like it. So there are these rituals that some people have. I never went through anything like that. I got my driver's license. I thought it was great, but I've been driving for 5 or 6 years already. I grew up on a farm where we started driving a tractor when I was 6 years old or 5 years old. I was driving cars and trucks when I was 12. So all just meant I could drive on the road legally. But yeah, but I think it's important that we recognize that we need some of that transition in some way. And Rolheiser talks about the prodigal son, which is a story which we're all very familiar with. That's first part of that. The young man who wants to leave is like wrestling with the devil. Remember the earlier story I told you about Father Marcarius? And how the first part of his life he's wrestling with the devil. And that's what the young man does. Do you remember what they say that he did with his money after he left? Squandered it on?
Prostitutes.
Right. I don't think they say prostitutes in the Bible. What do they say? Dissolute living. Who knows what dissolute living is? But it just leaves you to imagine, let your imagination go. But yes, he took the money that he had and he wasted it for the most part, and probably against the things that his father would never have approved of. The prodigal son squanders it, and then what? He realizes, I've blown it. Yeah, and he has to come back. And that was probably not the way he had envisioned it to happen. To come back, he says, I don't deserve to be called your son. He has that longing for the freedom and the pleasures of life. Everything he wants to do, he said, I'm going to do it on my own. And it was really an insult to his father, because you know when they normally got their inheritance? When father died. So when he says, I want my inheritance, it's like saying to his father, you're dead to me. Now, that's pretty strong. You don't mean anything to me. Your money's more important than you are. Whew. That's a pretty strong statement. And so when he had realized that he had lost it all, he had to come back, and it was very humiliating, probably. And what is the role of the older son? And when his younger brother showed up, that's right, he heard the party going. He was jealous, he was angry, probably somewhat bitter, yeah? What do you think are some of the primary forces affecting this stage of life? What are some of those, that makes people want to go out and do something? Get away from the house.
Hormones.
Hormones. Yep. Becoming independent. Becoming independent. Is that Anna's her name? Yeah. Thank you, Anna. Becoming independent. Yep. That's a lot of it. Excuse me? Pride. Thinking they know better. How many of us thought that we knew better than our parents at some point in our life? And then realize a little later, well, maybe that they said wasn't so stupid after all. They just got smarter after a while. Yeah, I remember that very well. I remember telling my dad, we used to work, he had a small business installing water lines and things. And we worked with him. I said, Dad, you're wasting so much time talking to all these people. We could be home a half an hour ago if you wouldn't stand around talking all the time. He enjoyed talking with people. That was part of his job, part of his life, was visiting. It wasn't just doing the job and getting more money. That was not the most important thing. It was creating friendships. When he died, 1,000 people came to the wake service. It was amazing. Because he stopped and talked to so many people. Okay, Dad, I guess I'm catching on. Yeah, we need to find out what that is. And that sexuality is such a powerful dimension of life that it sends us out. It makes us do things and feel things that we've never felt before. It's interesting, Ron Rolheiser talks about quite a bit about that through his book, about our own sexuality at that age and later ages and how we deal with that. And it's part of all of us. Some would say it's as much a part of us as breathing. You know, it's like somebody say, well, when you get professed, put on your habit, then you don't think about that anymore. Wrong. Just like people who get married say, well, I would never look at another woman or another man. Wrong. I'm not married, but I've heard that. It's a part of our life that I think is very significant. Loneliness is a significant part. And it's that desire for intimacy, that freedom to sign that we're looking for, to make our own decisions. I remember my sister and my brother-in-law were saying when their kids were at home, they always laid up at night waiting for the door to close. And no matter how quietly their sons and daughters tried to be coming in, they could always hear the car pull up or, a door click or something. Now I can sleep. That never happened to any of you, did it? But he says once they went off to college, they didn't do that anymore. Now, does that mean their sons and daughters were all coming in at appropriate times during the middle of the night? Probably not. But they just didn't know about it. And it's a real adjustment for that. I'd like for you to think about your own life. And what was childhood and puberty like in a sense for you? What were those significant events that kind of drove you out, as it says, out of the house, out of one home to try to, as he said, Rolheiser says, to create another home, to create our own home. And that's not an easy thing to do, not at all. It means sometimes people spend years going through this. Years and years. It's not like you say, okay, this is between 14 and 24. About 24, you got to have it all figured out. You know anybody beyond 24 years has still not figured it out? Sure. It's not a time frame. For some people, it helps fairly smoothly. Other people, there's a lot of chaos involved. And some people just never seem to get there. The prototypical 40-year-old guy that's sleeping on the couch or sleeping in the basement because he's never quite gotten beyond that stage. Others grow up and become just like their parents, whom they thought were fuddy-duddies or didn't really know what they were doing, and they realize how similar they are to them. I'd like for you to think, as I say, about your own life. Your childhood and puberty and young adulthood, was that a pleasant time? Was it somewhat chaotic? Was it challenging? Or was it exciting? Because you could do so many things that you couldn't do before. Yesterday, we split into groups. I'm going to ask you to do that again. And I have some questions for you to consider here. Let's see. Can you see that? No, you can't see that, John. I'm going to put this up on the board. And then after I give everybody this question, those of you who are online, I'm going to see if we can split into two groups. Since you said there are 22 again there, that's kind of a large group. So I'd like to see if we can split into two. So after everybody else is gone, we'll try that. I don't know if it'll work or not, but we'll try it. But anyhow, I'm going to send you the questions so you can see them, and everybody here can see them as well. Did it come up? No, not yet. There it goes. Describe a key experience in developing your own identity. If you want to write this down, or if you're going to remember, it's up to you. It could be a happy time, or a crisis, or confusion. And maybe there's more than one, but at least one key experience that says that's what really helped me in that developing that essential discipleship, that initial stage of who I am. Where was God in that change? Did you just say, okay, God, I don't need you anymore. I don't need my parents. I don't need you anymore either. I'm out of here. Or was somehow God at least implicitly a part of that? And who or what helped you through that experience? Because sometimes we find that there is a particular person that is significant to us in establishing our identity, our values, our faith, whatever.
So would anyone like to share the key experiences they had in developing their own identity?
I was remembering, can you hear me?
Yes.
I was remembering when I went to Catholic school the first 6 years of my life. And in my experience, they would take us in Roswell, New Mexico. They had the, oh gosh, now I can't think of the monjas. Oh boy, here goes my Spanglish. It was an order of nuns who did not speak, order of silence. I cannot remember the name of it in Roswell. At any rate, the school that I went to, St. Peter's, took us to see them and to pray with them and to be aware of who they are in our prayer life. And I left there thinking that I wanted to be closer to God and I wanted to become a nun. Of course, I'm in first grade and my mother's like, oh, mijita, you know, you've got a whole lifetime. God will be there when you're ready for him. I'm like, I felt really discouraged. But as my life went on, I became a juvenile probation officer. In my young childhood, I would always bring home stray children whose parents were neglecting them. They were alcoholics. And my mother would get so infuriated that, why can't you be like other children, bring home dogs, cats, birds, even a lizard if you wanted to. I brought home kids. In my teenage years, I became a volunteer, a big sister kind of person. And then I became a young adult and became a probation officer. And so what I've come to realize is all those things along the way made me not only an adult, but a spiritual person. So that's kind of what I was thinking here, that the incidences, there was other things that made that. There was a lot of control factors and different things, but the biggest thing that I remember is the life that I had at school with Sister Veronica and Sister Julie. And I recently, when my mother passed away 5 years ago, we were cleaning out one of her drawers. And I found there prayer cards from Sister Julie and Sister Veronica. And one of those cards said, "You will serve the Lord." So when I think about my life, sorry, it's emotional. I realize how God has been there all along, even through all the abusive struggles. So I think that when I think that the people that helped me through my life are all the people God put in my life along the way to keep me nurtured and developed. So that's what I got to say.
Thank you, Victoriana. Does anyone else want to share an experience that helped them in developing their own identity? I would like to share, because part of an experience that really had a major part in developing my identity as an adult is when I was in 6th grade, I had somebody accuse me of rape.
Ooh.
And it was another young man. That resulted in me being ostracized for pretty much a year and a half, where even my sister denied being related to me. I had no friends, I had no outreach. It led to a very severe round of depression. And at that time, I did not see God in this. I did not see anything except evil in what I was experiencing. Although now, when I look back on it, it was an experience that I believe has made me very compassionate and very empathetic with people who are accused of being other, of people who do not fit the norm, and which helps me today in understanding other people. But at the time, it was just absolutely a horrible experience, and I saw nothing of God and nothing of good in that. What really helped me through that, and I hate to say, my family was no help in it. My sisters were denying me. My parents were telling me ignore it and it will go away, which is probably one of the most damaging pieces of advice you can give a child. They don't have the tools to be able to ignore it. What helped me was just my parents recognizing that I couldn't cope, and I went into counseling, which was very, very helpful for me to put things back together. But again, as I said, in the long term, and this, by long term, I mean it was 20, 25 years before I came to my peace with that event, that's where I found God, was in finding that peace. Thank you. Anyone else sharing?
Yes.
I'll share.
Okay, I've got
Just tell us which one you want to go.
yeah. Well, it's Lucy Atkins' husband.
Henry. My name is Henry.
Henry.
When I was in the 8th grade, and I grew up in the South in a very segregated environment, my parents were gone one weekend, and the Afro-American maid who took care of us was taking care of us. They were supposed to be home by Sunday afternoon, and they got tied up. So they called and asked her if she could stay over till Monday. She said yes, but that she had to take us to church with her that evening. So that evening, we went to church with her. It was the first time I'd ever been inside a Black church. I was 12, 13 years old. But I also saw something I'd never seen before. In this church, she was called Mrs. I never knew that she had a last name. In this church, she taught a Bible study group. I never thought of her as a Bible study teacher. In this church, she was a leader. And in that situation, as a 12 or 13-year-old white male, I came to see her as a full human being, something I'd never seen before. That led me afterwards into conflict with many people, particularly school teachers. I remember being taken to the principal's office in the 9th grade because I had stated simply that I knew that Black people and white people were both human beings. I was almost expelled from school. I received some support from my family. My father was very cautious. My father said, "You're going to get into a lot of trouble. You shouldn't talk that way." But the one thing that I knew was...
You all still can you hear me talk? It says mine is unstable.
But
Yes, we can hear you, Father Tom.
But the one thing that I knew was that God loved all people. And I knew that God was with me in this struggle. Now that carried over. I later became very much involved in the civil rights movement, etc. But it all began when I was 12 or 13 years old and came to the realization that this person was a human being and that what I had been taught by my dominant culture was not true. And it moved me to be willing to question and to live in a very different way, for which I was very thankful. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lynn, did you want to share?
Just briefly, last night I mentioned that I was orphaned. And so my late teens and 20s were really just kind of lost years. I really didn't care what kind of job I had and different relationships. Then I met my husband when I was in my 30s, but I feel like I was one of God's special ed children because he arranged the circumstances for me through other people that would help me develop. And it was when I got my career with the federal government, which I didn't want. But I had to learn and do so many things in that job that were uncomfortable for me, um, that it gradually really solidified me as a person, finding out that I could do things that I had never thought of. So my husband was a big part of that because he kept encouraging me to stay in that job, even though I really didn't want it. Um, so I feel really like I was aware that God was helping me, but I didn't really feel like I had much to do with it. I sort of went along for the ride, and I was lucky that circumstances provided me with the opportunity to grow. And of course, there were many people who did impact me in my early life, too many to mention. And I'm really grateful that my parents were Christian, that, I wasn't raised Catholic, but that background eventually brought me to the church after a lot of wandering. So there's just a lot of people, but I think that God works through the people around us sometimes in spite of us. He helps us, he puts us in situations that we don't always want, that we need, and we often don't realize until much, much later. I'm so grateful now for that career that I had, that I really didn't want the entire 19 and a half years I was there. But it gave me skills to do all kinds of things in my retirement. And anyway, that's it.
Thank you. Anyone else wanting to share?
Well,
I will.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Roberto.
yeah, I'll share a little bit of my life with you all. I was raised in a large family, poor family in New Mexico years ago, and I think that my identity really evolved in so many ways as a youth, both happy times and crisis and confusion. And at the age of 33, 34, 35, I experienced a time of extreme anxiety attacks. In the meantime, I had certainly held jobs and accomplished things. I was a father, had been married for a while. And during those anxiety attacks, I visited with a priest and trying to find an answer for what was happening to me. And he told me something that made me really think about myself. He said, well, no one is going to change you. You have to change yourself. Whatever is going on in your life is perhaps being created by things that happened in the past and things that are happening now. So you need to talk to God about that. At the time, I'm a cradle Catholic, but I wasn't practicing Catholicism very well, let alone my Christianity. So I started praying and I started reading scripture and I started finding myself, but it wasn't until one day I got up at 2 a.m. for some reason and I went into the formal dining room and I got down on my knees. And as I was praying, I really felt that my calling. From then on, I became very involved in the church and I began to love it. And I found God in a very profound way. And later on, I was in life, became successful in a federal job. And I was ordained a deacon 31 years ago, which made me have a tremendous love for the church, for God, for people. I don't consider myself completely found, but I'm working at it. And I think my life is still evolving. However, what I cherish the most right now is God's presence in my life, and the thing that I look for is the virtue of peace, because I find that the more I have peace, the more I find myself, because it helps me to look. And so I've realized also in the meantime that faith is good, but it doesn't do it all for you. You have to trust. And that has been very satisfying to me. So I'm so grateful for God, what he's done for me. I'm more understanding of my family, my wife, my children, and my grandchildren, the parishioners. I have a tremendous amount of love and affection by people, and respect that is so profound that I never knew that God was going to shower me with that kind of love. So that's how my life has evolved, and appreciate the opportunity to share that with you.
Thank you.
I
I
can
know,
share.
thank you, yes.
No. But it's
No.
okay. If it's the time, I don't need to do.
We still have a little time.
It is the time, it is your turn.
Okay. So for me, the experience that is very clear since I was very young, I was very passionate, and I like always the truth. Okay. So I was no good student, and my poor mother, bueno, I repeat 1 year on the school, so she thought that it was good for me to have a change of school, and I was sent to the Assumption in Barcelona in a boarding school. So I remember vividly how one of the days, one of the sisters, the nuns, told me something that it was not true. And I was so enraged. I say, no, es verdad. And logically, the girls should not answer badly to the nuns, okay? But I was so convinced that it was the truth that I was doing, no. And I got very upset, and I locked myself. So I didn't talk about anything, and little by little, I was more angry, more disconnected, more upset. So that weekend, instead of going with my friends outside, etc., I say, I need to pray. And I remember to go to the chapel by myself and being so upset with my inability to break through my silence and to be at peace with myself and with the other people, and to explain peacefully what really happened. By contrast, I have my teacher, we call the person who was in charge of us, that she never judged me, always say, tell me what happened. And she got the information that I was giving her, and she received the information of the other people about me, not always coinciding. Well, I struggled. It was like the Jacob in Esto, a whole weekend with myself and reading the Word of God and crying. And I repeat the experience that suddenly at the end of this struggle, it came exactly a word of God telling Job, oh my goodness, in English, I have no idea. No, I don't know what is. I will say in Spanish, and the people who understand is okay, and the other is okay too. It got to me in front of my Bible, no? A phrase dice, hasta aquí llegarán el orgullo de tus olas. Aquí no más allá. Y fue como si de repente, it was like after you go into the sea, no? and you see the strength of the waves, no, until they crash. And everything after is and since then I have the repeated experience that the only way where I can be broken and get in peace with myself and with the reality that I am living is always through God. Nobody can explain and make that kind of wholeness back into me. And that was the occasion of my vocation, exactly, no? The same woman, a nun who always believed in me, and instead of accepting what other people was instead of only accepting that part, took me into the picture and asked me something, no? So from early and very passionate, ¿cómo se llaman? Adolescencia, I learned how God was the center and the integrated reference. That's it.
Thank you, Isabella.
Okay.
You have time for one more?
Yeah, perhaps, but people haven't come back yet.
All right, I'll try to make it very brief. Just this year, I was 79, and it took me all this time to, at the beginning of the year, to really realize where God has brought me and why things happen throughout my life, because I've been fighting him all along. When I was a child, I had a privileged upbringing, and my mother was very, very ill all the time. I loved her dearly, and she suffered from serious illnesses and was always on the verge of dying. So very early on, I would go to bed and pray to God, please, dear Lord, make sure that mommy is awake, that when I wake up, she's still here. And I went to bed scared to death that the next day she'd be dead. And I lived all that way until I went off to college. And I didn't want to go to college, but she practically kicked me out. She said, you have got to continue your life. And anyway, I went to college, got married, later divorced. And through all those struggles, it wasn't until I started my career with the State Department that sent me out to Central America. And I was in El Salvador. And there in El Salvador, I learned to love poor people. I learned they're the most beautiful human beings. They were warm, loving, open, it taught me so much. I grew up so much during that time. You know, here I thought I was a educated, blah, blah, blah person, and here this poor person gave me so much knowledge. Anyway, I came back to the States, left, retired from that life, and then I joined Father Tom at the ministry in Indiana and continued my love of the poor and, you know, looking after our community, which was largely from rural Mexico and some other Central American countries. And really, it's not until now that I have a nonprofit and work so much with immigrants that I realize why God took me all this way. Took me to learn where they came from, took me to understand, and Father knows this because he did a whole year's tour visiting people. And it's not until you come to the reality and the essence of human beings that you realize, oh my God. So here I am writing a book. I'm in the verge of telling their stories, not mine, theirs. So hopefully, hopefully one day you'll read it. It's called The Church Lady's Diary. I'm the last person on earth you'd ever call a church lady, but anyway, so God definitely has spoken to me throughout.
That's great. I'm so happy. I'm proud of you, Lillian.
Thank you, Father.
Okay, I think we're going to have to call this part back together. The group is coming back in.
Yeah.
Sorry, the group experience, was that helpful? Yeah, it's I listened to some that were shared on the people who are online. It's actually pretty moving to listen to people's stories and to see how God has been a part of that. Even when you're in the middle of it, it doesn't feel like it's there, that God is there. Sometimes you realize it at a later point, how significant that is. And it's just wonderful, wonderful to see. Still a few more people coming back in. I don't want to go too far until they get here. But I think that we're gonna talk. I think this sense of growing up is something that some of us reach a point where we say, "Okay, I know what I'm doing," and others we just keep going and keep changing. I've talked with people who work for the same company for 30 and 40 years. That doesn't happen much anymore. People tend to change their lifestyles and their whatever. Marriage commitments and life commitments and where you live, we're much more mobile. But maybe that one constant is God's presence in our life. Even though so many other things change, that is there. And there's also something about us also that stays with us from our childhood, I think. There are times, as I said, that I looked at my dad and I said, "Why are you doing it this way? It'd be much better this way." And why are you wasting all this time talking to people? I found out, and you know what I do most of my life these days? Talk with people. My mother was the same way. She could talk to anybody. I remember once we were in a park, and she saw a wedding party come in over there. And said, "Oh, look at that, they're taking pictures." And she walks over and starts talking to these people. I said, "Mother, it's a family gathering." "Oh, well, they won't mind." And they didn't. They were just delighted. She came over and started talking to them. And there's some of that in me. Even though I didn't realize it at first, I can visit with just lots and lots of people. I think we pick up those experiences of our parents. Hopefully the best qualities, and can let go of some of the other qualities, but not always. Sometimes we pick up both parts. And there's a song I'd like to share with you. By the way, I intentionally am not asking you to share with the whole group, which you talked about in your small groups. I think sometimes that's very personal stuff. But if you want to share that with somebody else, of course, that's up to you. But we do move away and we come back. At one point of my brothers and sisters, 5 of us, 6 of us lived out of town, out of state. And then within a few years, we were all 10 back within an hour of each other again. And it was delightful. And I'm the only one that's out of town. And my nephews and nieces, many of them are back. But it's good to feel that. This is a song which you might be familiar with. It's called "The Cat's in the Cradle." Has anybody ever heard that song before?
Yeah.
I think it's a Harry Chapin song. But it just speaks to me of that movement back and forth and kind of making their own identity. Child was born just the other day, came to the world in the usual way, but there were planes to catch, bills to pay. He learned to walk while I was away. Well, he's talking before I knew it. As he grew, he said, "I'm gonna be like you, Dad. You know I'm gonna be like you." Oh, the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, and the little boy blue and the man in the moon. When you're coming home, Dad, I don't know when we'll get together then. You know we'll have a good time then. My son turned 10 just the other day. He said, "Thanks for the ball, Dad, come on, let's play. Can you teach me to throw?" I said, "Not today, I got a lot to do." He said, "That's okay." And he walked away, but his smile never dimmed. He said, "I'm gonna be like him. Oh, you know I'm gonna be like him." Now the cat's in the cradle and the silver spoon, and the little boy blue and the man in the moon. When you're coming home, Dad, I don't know when we'll get together then. You know we'll have a good time then. My son came from college just the other day. So much like a man, I just had to say, son, I'm proud of you. Can you sit for a while? He shook his head and he said with a smile, all I'd really like, Dad, is to borrow the car keys. See you later, can I have them, please? Well, the cat's in the cradle and a silver spoon. The little boy blue and the man in the moon. When you're coming home, Dad, son, I don't know when we'll get together then. Dad, you know we'll have a good time then. Long since retired, my son's moved away. Called him up just the other day. I said, I'd like to see you if you don't mind. He said, I'd love to, Dad, if I could find the time. You see, my new job's a hassle and the kids have the flu. But it's sure nice talking to you, Dad. Sure nice talking to you. And as I hung up the phone, it occurred to me, my boy was just like me. My boy was just like me. Well, the cat's in the cradle and a silver spoon, and a little boy blue, the man in the moon. When you're coming home, son, I don't know when we'll get together then, Dad. You'll have a good time. There's something very poignant about that. Something very poignant. It's that desire to move on, be like his dad in many ways. And the dad realizing, yeah, but maybe he picked up some of the qualities I'd rather he hadn't. We can make a choice. Who was it? I think somebody was saying it maybe on the online group, that it's each one of us who makes the choice. And it's a hard choice to make because we're breaking kind of tradition and heritage and lots of other things if we want to change some of those characteristics. But with the help of the Lord and with good friends, it's possible. I believe that. And I think that's the struggle that Ron Rolheiser was talking about, that struggle to create my own identity in a way that speaks well of who I am, where I feel comfortable with that. So you might spend some more time during the day just thinking about some of those same questions. Where's God in the midst of that? How do you help if you have adult sons and daughters or young adults or grandchildren maybe who are going through that? How do you support them without them feeling like you're interfering? I don't know. But it's an important thing, that transition. And it moves us into the next story, what they call the mature discipleship.